Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Amy, for getting us all tuned in, and welcome to everyone. This is our League of Women Voters' first Zoom and Learn for this fall, and we are very excited. It's a continuation of our study on the subject of criminal justice reform. If those of you who joined in last year may remember, we had a presentation by the Forward Together Committee from the city of Modesto. And so we are now going to this evening have a presentation, which is the Sheriff Department's version of, and we're going to find out what Project Resolve is. So our great speaker that we've known, many of us, throughout a lot of different areas, is Kate Trompetter. And she will share a little bit about herself, and I'm going to talk a little bit about her. And then she will go in and introduce her guests. And then we are going to find out, what is Project Resolve? What is it? How does it work? How is it formed? How does it compare to other reforms that are going on? And so we welcome everyone. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about Kate. I was going to say I watched her grow up, but no, I'll leave that alone. She is the owner and CEO of Connect 4, which is a local social purpose system that changes social systems change and coaching firm. You're going to hear more about that. That was a mouthful, but she has a message in there. So though tonight, what she's going to share with us is a little bit about Project Resolve. It was started by Sheriff Jeff Dirkse in the July of 2020. The intention was to put together law enforcement executives from across the county with community leaders to talk about the degree to which our diverse communities trust local law enforcement. Kate will also share more about the evolution of this project, what they are doing, and what they are learning. She will also bring on board her several guests. And at this time, I would like to turn it over to Kate, who will introduce some of her guests, and then we will go into our presentation on what is Project Resolve all about. Thank you, Kate.
Yeah, thank you. Principal Portwood. Is that what I should call you? Uh, it's how Pat and I have been connected for many, many moons. And then I just have to say that I became reconnected when I was working at Center for Human Services and had the delight of connecting with Pat and Ron as donors and fell in love all over again. So it's an easy yes when I was asked to come present on the work that we've been doing in Project Resolve. And I'm excited to see you all again when we give you an update on Forward Together in a month. So, just a couple of words about myself. I've been doing essentially a consulting practice for the last 5 years since I left my role in the nonprofit world. And essentially, where you're going to find me in my consulting work is whenever there are groups that need to come together and align themselves around an issue and think about a way forward. So I do a lot of work in the areas of homelessness, educational outcomes, you know, easy things that are easy to solve. So I find myself often in the role of facilitator, meeting designer, trying to create really effective spaces where everyone can have their voices heard, where we can talk about the stories we have about things and make sense of things together. So often I'm in rooms with people who don't agree and trying to create really effective experiences so that we can get to action in a way that aligns as many people as possible. So when Sheriff Dirkse called in July of 2020 and asked if I would help to facilitate a group of law enforcement executives and community members, it was an easy yes for me for a variety of reasons. Essentially, all the things that I work on are areas where no one person or organization could possibly be responsible for solving it by themselves, that we have to do it together. We're not going to program our way out of many of the issues that we are confronted with in our communities locally and across the world, and certainly the country. I'm really excited that today I have some guests with me. I have Chief Jerry Ramar from the great city of Oakdale. I also have Marion Martino, who many of you may already know as a fierce community advocate in lots of ways, does a ton of work at Juvenile Hall. Delighted to have her join us today. We have Dr. Phil Trompetter, who is a partially retired police and forensic psychologist who spent many years working in this community, also happens to be my father. And then, of course, I have Sheriff Jeff Dirkse, who is the founder of this project, and we're going to talk a little bit about how it's evolved. But I just want to call out that because I'm a little behind the eight ball in my life at this moment, that all of these people said yes when I asked them to be here like 2 days ago. So I also am just going to take that as an indication that they believe in the work that we've been doing. So thanks so much. I'll invite them to speak at a couple of different points during this presentation, but I'm like really, really looking forward to your questions. So in July of 2020, as I said, Sheriff Jeff Dirkse called. This was on the heels of the murder of George Floyd and all the other unrest across the country and certainly in our own community. And I do like to brag about this particular moment, and that the sheriff said, we need to we have to talk to each other. We need to get people in a room. And essentially, Sheriff, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it was like, I think we have pretty good relationships in this community, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. And I want to start talking about it. And so he sent out an invitation to every law enforcement executive in Stanislaus County. So when I say that, I mean every police chief, members of the sheriff's department, the DA, probation, CHP, and said, will you come to, well, at the time it was, will you come to 3 meetings? We're going to figure some stuff out. We've got 3 meetings. I even have a slide for this part that I enjoy sharing. So I was like, we're going to have 3 meetings. We're going to figure it out. So that was the original invitation. And then at the end of that, it was like, no, wait a minute, let's have 3 more meetings. And then at the end of that, it was like, oh, wait, we might have to keep going forever. So what has become of Project Resolve is, we have a fierce commitment to the ongoing exploration of whether or not there's trust and strong relationships between community and law enforcement in Stanislaus County. And I think the group has gotten to a place where they get that job is never done. And I'm going to share some of those learnings. But this is a network. So Forward Together, just as an important distinction, was an initiative. And there was a beginning and an end, and an expectation that group of people would come up with a set of recommendations they could offer back to the Modesto City Council. What Project Resolve is a network. So we gather, I tried to count it up, but every one of those little dots is a large group meeting, meaning that every law enforcement executive and community members got together at least 15 times in the last 2 years or so, to do learning, to build relationships with one another, to try to make sense of things together. We started with an icebreaker session where people just got to know each other. I do want to share, this is the current, I hope you can see that. I tried to fit it in a slide. It just got complicated. But like, this is our current roster. So you can see that in addition to law enforcement, we also have local elected officials, mayors from different cities, city managers, community members like Dr. Trompetter, Marion Martino. We also have been trying to engage our local universities. We have the NAACP, we have the Asian Alliance, Love Stanislaus County, Stanislaus Youth Empowerment Program, which is a program committed to the lifting up and empowerment of our young BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color in Stanislaus County. So the interest was in trying to combine all our law enforcement executives with community representatives for us to do this work. So this group, in this current formation, has been meeting for quite some time and generating a lot of activity. Early in our work, we invited folks with what we call lived experience to come and tell their stories. Many of you may have had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Michael Baldwin. He was one of our first guests, and others who live in our community who've been able to share about their experience with law enforcement. And we also did a community-wide assessment, which was invested in by the Sheriff's Department and I believe a private donor. and I'm going to share some of those results with you, but we engaged a firm that went out and took the pulse of this community around questions regarding the degree of trust and strong relationships between community and law enforcement. We invited our community members to go on ride-alongs, participate in scenario training whenever there was an opportunity for us to try to understand somebody else's story, no matter which quote unquote side of the issue you sit on. We encouraged and provided the resources and time for folks to do that. So I have other things that I'd like to share, but Sheriff, I was wondering if you wanted to add a couple things about why we started in the first place and sort of what this experience has been like for you.
I did. Thank you, Kate. And thank you everyone for having this meeting tonight. So as Kate has already indicated, this started after the George Floyd incident in 2020. And it really kind of stemmed from a conversation that my wife and I had of really the idea of, okay, what can we do in our community to, if not prevent the incident from happening, at least create stronger relationships within our community to prevent maybe the fallout of a similar incident. And so that led to a series of phone calls, Kate being one of the first ones, because Kate and I have worked together on a number of projects over the years, and I have great faith and trust in her. And she immediately said yes, thankfully, because we would not be where we're at today without her. And then a variety of other members across the community. And we started what we called Project Resolve 1.0. And that was to have a lot of conversations. We call it 1.0 now. It didn't start that way because originally we're going to do this in 6 months and 3 meetings. We're going to solve all these problems. And as Kate has already alluded to, immediately we came to the conclusion that no, this is going to take longer. It's going to take more meetings. And now we have arrived at the point of this is probably going to go on into perpetuity, hopefully. But we did a lot of presentations from the law enforcement side, heard from those with lived experience and so on, and just generated a lot of really good conversation. A lot of networking, but really out of Project Resolve 1.0, and I fully admit it involved what I call a lot of the usual suspects. Everyone that got an invitation was someone that I personally have some level of relationship with, some stronger than others, but I knew that they were people that represented a broad cross-section of our community, but I knew them already. And I tried to be fairly intentional. A lot of folks hit multiple demographics or criteria, if you will, because we did want broad representation. But one thing that we learned quickly in Project Resolve 1.0 is that we're like, oh, wow, we totally forgot about that population or that group. Or somebody brought up, what about this or what about that? And like, wow, we just forgot about that because we're all humans. So we tried to expand that moving into 2.0, get away from some of the usual suspects, specifically move into youth, which were not included in the first one. And we have kind of expanded our audience moving forward. And there's a lot of ongoing conversations. And one thing that I will say kind of specifically from the law enforcement perspective is that we would come out of a lot of these meetings and, let me back up. All of this also occurred during COVID. So everything in the first year and a half was virtual. So if you can imagine the difficulties of discussing very weighty topics that we were all in a virtual setting where a lot of the folks did not know a lot of the other folks, that it became difficult to develop a certain sense of trust. That being said, and I will be very open from the law enforcement perspective, I can't tell you the number of times we would get off of I think we were on Zoom or Teams or whatever platform we were on, and we would close our 3-hour-long meeting, and I'd go into the undersheriff's office or some captain's office and like, can you believe the stupid idea that person had? And we would all be like, oh my gosh, that's so bad, and that'll never happen. And then a week later, be like, I've thought about that since then, and maybe that wouldn't work, but what if we did it like this instead? And it has been a very, very eye-opening experience for us, just hearing some of the feedback and really thinking through a lot of the ways that we do business in law enforcement as a profession or as an organization. That hasn't changed everything. And there are certainly things that maybe the public would not pick up on that have changed, but internally, we can certainly point to and say this is a result of Project Resolve. And then it also creates an environment for us to try a lot of things. And the term pilot or a first step or whatever you might want to call it has become very, very commonplace in our conversations, both internal to Project Resolve and then external to it within the organization of, hey, what if we just tried that? On a small scale, let's see what happens. And so it's been a wonderful experience. I really appreciate all of those who have participated. Dr. Trumpetter, Marion Martino, wherever you went on my screen. Oh, there you are. You're in the middle right. Hi. And obviously, Kate, thank you for your facilitation. And Chief Ramar, who is on from Oakdale. I think, Jerry, you've been on from day one, maybe Scott Hiller at first. I don't recall exactly. And that's the other thing. A lot of law enforcement leaders have changed over the last 2 years. So we're kind of coming up to speed and there's new ideas and there's people like, what the heck is this thing? Just like there is with our civilian or community population. So I think I'm going to leave it with that. Kate, turn it back over to you and I'll be here for a while for any questions. So thanks, everyone.
Cool. Thanks, Sheriff. So I'm just going to go through a couple of things that we've been learning, just so we can share all of that with you all about the work we've been doing. And then I'm going to invite their 3 other guests to just maybe share a bit about what they've been getting out of it, as the sheriff did. So I'm going to make this PowerPoint available too. I can send this to Pat or Amy if we want to send it, because there's a lot of information and I know we're limited time. And very first community-wide assessment. This was published in the Modesto Bee. It was available, I believe, on the sheriff's website and some other places. But here's some highlights from the first community assessment we did. Generally the feedback was that there was some pretty favorable opinions of law enforcement in Stanislaus County. And, we know that our poll maybe didn't get to everybody, but this was pointing at something. And one of the things I was very proud of is that in the very first meeting when EMC Research, which is the polling agency we worked with, came and presented this information, is that our partners, our law enforcement partners, were some of the first to say, like, okay, that's 77%. Cool. That sort of affirms what we were thinking. What is happening with that other 23%, testing my math skills, right? Like, really quickly, we're able to get to the question of, let's think about who doesn't trust us and what's happening for those folks. So you'll also see that there's some other information in here about, like, those that have a less positive or more negative rating are going to be our BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, people of color residents. Our Hispanic residents, they're going to be younger, usually in like the 18 to 40 range. The other thing that was very interesting to this group is that on the whole, there's very little difference. People don't really perceive a difference between our law enforcement agencies. And so that was important for us to recognize, because when I say that no one person can be responsible for solving this by themselves, it's because, at least in part, this very thing. What's good for Oakdale is good for all our law enforcement agencies. When something bad happens at, the police department or the sheriff's department, that's bad for everybody. When something bad happens in Pennsylvania, that's bad for everybody, right? So it isn't just the behavior of our own institutions and organizations that impacts how much our community trusts our law enforcement, which is directly connected to the safety of this community. It's all law enforcement. We're not making the distinction between different agencies. And despite the positive ratings that folks had of our law enforcement agencies, people are still concerned about police violence in this community. So we can have some generally good feelings about our local law enforcement agencies and still be concerned about police violence. So all of this data was pointing at things for this group, and it continues to point at things for this group. I'll share a couple of their learnings in just a second, but we are getting ready to do this assessment again. That was a commitment that came out of this work, was that we would try to do this assessment every couple of years, because we want to know if anybody's really better off because of the time and energy and the activities we're generating as a result of this work. The other things, these are sort of more general lessons that, and the sheriff spoke to some of these, but this idea that it takes time. So we knew we were going to have to keep meeting with one another. Trust is not something that you earn and then it's done, as we know from our marriages and our friendships and even, with our animals or whatever. Trust can be broken very easily. It can be broken in ways that have nothing to do with us. It can be broken on accident. So this is something that requires our ongoing attention always. And the goodwill that we have is fragile because it is influenced by so many things beyond our control. So again, we need to continue to tend to it. We knew at the end of the day, and I heard the sheriff say this at the front of one of our meetings, that this all comes down to relationships. It all comes down to relationships. Our ability to be influenced by one another, that like when people say they're in pain, we believe them, and our ability to be influenced by one another is the key ingredient to our being able to get anything good done and anything sustainable done. We knew we were missing voices, as the sheriff said, and building collective will matters too. We're only this is, in fact, I feel like this might be the first public presentation that we've done about this work. We know that it's important for us to build some public will, that we need to bring the community along. It's not enough for us to learn this stuff and keep it to ourselves. We know that we need to be building will amongst the broader community as well, because in fact, this belongs to all of us. So, okay, this is the last thing I'm going to offer before I invite just a couple other sharing and then questions. And oh yes, Sylvia, I see your question. Yes, the research is broken down by zip code. So I can also make this original report available. I can send the PowerPoint and the report to Amy or Pat to get it out to folks. So we are keeping track of what we call a solutions portfolio. So when the sheriff talked about testing, prototyping, piloting things, one of the things that is very important to me in any of my work is that sometimes these really big problems or challenges, they can feel so overwhelming, like they just feel seemingly intractable, right? And so what we do is try to smallify things. And if we can just look at data for what it is, which is data that's pointing at something, get very scientific and almost and like diagnostic about what's happening, and then develop solutions around what we're seeing. And then just what I say to these folks often is, build me something you can test next week. Just build me the next right thing and let's go do it. And let's learn, is it working? Is it not working? What needs to be different? Do it again. And so all of these things you see here are things that are either in development, coming online, or already happening. And I'll highlight just a couple. Solutions in development, just our last meeting, we have had a conversation with the county about the development of a reentry and rehabilitation program that would be modeled after a program in Los Angeles called Homeboy Industries. This is something that will be sponsored through Focus on Prevention and Project Resolve. And again, this is all, can we learn about what helps us to build and sustain trust between community and law enforcement? We're doing work eventually on like, what is the role of school resource officers? Law enforcement thinks they do one thing, pretty sure students think they're there for another reason. There's a lot of misunderstandings about what's happening there and probably a lot of missed opportunities. The weed and seed is just language that we all understand, but essentially we're partnering with Love Stanislaus, potentially Modesto Police Department, and local behavioral health and recovery services around what it means to do neighborhood-based work around the weaving together of community and law enforcement, and actually hiring people who live in neighborhoods to help do the kind of relationship building we've been doing in this group. We've had conversations in different ways about citizen review, oversight, and independent auditors across all the departments within LEX, the law enforcement executive teams. You all will hear an update next month about what's happening with Forward Together. So that's been something that has continued to be a dialogue. And then you'll also see over here that we have a couple of other things going on. One, I'll call out a couple. Shop Talks is something that Ceres Police Department is trying out, which is about having law enforcement inside barbershops. And what happens there was piloted in Texas. It's a beautiful program. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening there. The idea being that barbers and the people in their shops develop these relationships. They take the barbers through ride-alongs and simulation trainings and all those things. And law enforcement gets to hear the stories of community, so it impacts law enforcement, and it has this cascading effect into communities that also happen to be primarily communities of color. And then in Houston, we have a prototype where we took the old model of community academies. We made it more, not just one way where law enforcement tells community this is what we do. So there's a lot of opportunity for community to tell their stories, to ask questions, to influence law enforcement as well. And the whole thing is being done entirely in Spanish. So these are examples of how we're taking sometimes things that aren't brand new, these aren't new concepts, and just trying to make them appropriate for this community and the people who live here based on the data and what we're hearing from people. So the last thing I'll say is that what our interest is that we're collecting data that tells us whether any of this stuff is working, and then we use the large group meetings to reflect on that data together. So we can also just learn together about what's working and what's not working. Okay, there's so much I could say about this, and it's like the smallest body of work that I have, but it's the thing that makes me the most energized and sort of has my heart. I know we're going to go to questions, but I would love to hear from either Chief Ramar, Dr. Trompetter, Marion Martino, not either, all of you actually, just about what you're taking from this experience since you've been with us for a long time. I mean, I can call on someone. How about Dr. Trompetter, because I can do that to my father.
Well, thank you, Kate. Good evening, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I am a police psychologist. So I was the department psychologist for 30 years for most of the local law enforcement agencies, and had an inside seat, a front row seat to law enforcement. I never had a crisis of trust in local law enforcement because what I saw didn't alarm me or trouble me. When George Floyd was murdered in May of 2020, I was reawakened, like I think many people throughout the country, maybe the world. And I was starting to have a crisis of confidence in law enforcement. I had a couple of conversations with the sheriff, and I didn't change my mind about law enforcement, but I really welcomed this Project Resolve, and I appreciated the sheriff and trust the sheriff that he means what he says when he wants to look at what he can do and to improve police community relations. And I wanted to, and that's a multifaceted set of problems. And I started having questionings about some use of force incidents that have occurred in this county. And I'm sure you've heard of police civilian oversight. And so I got really interested in it. I'm still not totally convinced that that's the way to go, but had the sheriff and I have had some discussions about that. It's a complex issue. I would be remiss if I didn't say how many fathers get a chance to work with their daughter leading the group, right? So I've attended every meeting, I believe, of Project Resolve, and I'm committed to stay the course because I believe in Jeff. I believe in what this project is intending to do, and I get to work with fine people like J.J. Ramar and Marion. Is that enough, Kate?
Yeah, it's great. Chief Ramar, would you mind sharing a little bit next?
Sure. So there was something that Dr. Trumpetter said, in the crisis of trust. And being in law enforcement, I never had the crisis of trust, but from law enforcement, we absolutely have to listen to the community because the community gets to determine how they're policed. So when Project Resolve first came along, I was a lieutenant at the police department. Chief Heller was the one that attended Project Resolve, but I absolutely wanted to attend because I believed in what was happening and believed in the fact that we can build better relationships. So when it first started, I was happy with the 77%, but absolutely think that we can do better. And the way that we do better, that's what we always struggle with in law enforcement. How can we do better? And that is listening to our communities, but not just listening to our communities, but having a way that we engage with the communities. And that's where Project Resolve comes in. And I'd like to thank, at this point, Sheriff Dirkse for having this vision, because I believe that it's making a difference. But the way Project Resolve works, from my perspective, is that we have a moderator that sets the ground rules, and no matter what where you're coming from as part of Project Resolve, everybody listens because everybody has a stake in this. So essentially what's happening is it makes it so that we can communicate. And I think that's where a lot of the crisis comes in, is just lack of communication. This Project Resolve gives us that ability, and we actually take we take things from it that we can use and build our relationships and maybe get, not just maybe, but see a big change. I want to see the new statistics, but I think we've made a big difference in that the 77% is going to be higher. And I'll just leave it at that. But with Project Resolve, but what's next? What's our next incident? The sheriff and I, well, I shouldn't speak for the sheriff, but I know I'm always waiting for the next one, because we know something's going to happen that's going to paint law enforcement in a bad light. And it's not generally in Stanislaus County. I think we do a really good job, but we know that when something bad happens in law enforcement, we're going to have to lean on the people, lean on our communities that we build the trust with. And that's where Project Resolve comes in, is that we build those relationships and we build the trust, and we can kind of trust our community and they can trust us. That's what Project Resolve really does for us.
Thank you. This is sort of fun for me because I don't actually get to hear people talk about it very often. So, Marion, would you share?
Sure thing. So you're also nice. So my superpower is showing up. It's what I do. It's what I've done for years and years and years. It's what I did for gay and lesbian advocacy back in the 90s. It's what I do now for juvenile justice, because I've been volunteering in juvenile hall for over a dozen years, doing a creative writing class, which I recognize is sometimes more creative than writing. But the point of my being there is hanging out with the kids and letting them know that someone from the outside cares about them and that they matter. A lot of those kids have a different opinion of some people in law enforcement, which I think is understandable. I think one of the benefits I've had of being on Project Resolve is that I've had a chance to meet more members of law enforcement. Because yes, I had a suspicion that some of these kids were maybe exaggerating a little bit. But be that as it may, their experiences is their truth, and they have seen loss of life of their friends, unfortunately, sometimes as a result of interactions with law enforcement. Relationships is the thing that I get most out of showing up, and I appreciate Sheriff Dirkse and his sense of building relationships and how critical that is to the work that needs to be done. And also, I appreciate Kate encouraging each of the members of Project Resolve to get to know other members, people that we don't necessarily cross paths with. I'm in Moro with Phil. I see him every week, sometimes more than that. So whenever I have this opportunity to be forced to meet new people or invited to meet new people, I take advantage of that, because now they have to. And so I had the pleasure of sitting down with Rick Collins. So what I do when I get this sort of challenge is I look at the people and I go, well, who are the ones I have the least in common with? Okay, well, let me ask the chief of police in Steries, who happens to be a Black man, and let me be his friend. So I had the most wonderful conversation with Chief Collins. I consider him a good friend because he did what what you must do to be my friend, which is read Tattoos on the Heart, written by Father Greg Boyle from Homeboy Industries. But I suggested that to him. He read it, and I said, if you want to be my friend, you got to do this. So he did. I also had lunch with Fidel Linderas, chief of police, part of the sheriff's department in Houston. And I went out to Houston, and I got a great feeling for him and what his life's like and what's important to him and his family and his community. And so those are the things that have benefited me in seeing the broader picture.
Thanks, Marion. So just a couple final thoughts, and then we'd love to take some questions. So I don't want to make it like, I don't think anyone intends to make this sound like we all get into a room and we just get along with each other and we love each other all the time. We've had some really hard and painful conversations, but that's the point, right? Because we have been and are living in a moment where the impulse and habitual response of people when they disagree, when they're hurt, they're angry, is to go to their corners, or to go to their corners and yell at each other a lot. I want to be very clear that I have a lot of appreciation and gratitude for people who want to yell at other people, because in many ways, we would not be having this conversation if it wasn't for folks who screamed really loudly about wanting to burn it all down. We all play different roles, right, in this change ecosystem that we are creating. The conversations we're having in Project Resolve is really about, as Chief Ramar said, like, we've created a center of gravity where people can come and they can mess up and they can say the wrong thing. I had a meeting once where somebody in a position of authority said the wrong thing, and another community member called me after that meeting and he said, okay, all I wanted to do after that person said that thing was take to Facebook and blow him up. But the first thing I thought about was our group agreements, and I called you. And I thought, do I go about this a different way? So then they made a phone call and they had a conversation. Okay? So not that any of those choices are wrong. They all contribute to a culture of change. But in this space in Project Resolve, we're about staying at the table. The sheriff has said that every time, that the only request he has of people who join this group is that they don't walk away, especially when it gets hard. So the very final thing I want to say is that the evolution of Project Resolve is that we can say thank you to the sheriff for starting it and for funding it for 2 years. And now it belongs to everyone because it's being funded through Focus on Prevention. So Focus on Prevention, community-wide initiative that is about, exactly as it says, focusing on prevention. Project Resolve, we are considering a neighborhood initiative, which is about safety and building trust. So what's really important about that is that this is not to sound as though it was a bad thing that it lived at the sheriff's department, but this really should belong to everyone, right? Maybe not any one institution or organization. It needs to belong to everyone. So the sheriff started something really important. It grew roots, and then we moved it out of the sheriff's department so that everyone could have a piece of it. And I'm very excited about what that means. Okay, Sheriff, I'll bring you in, and then let's get to some questions in the chat.
Yeah, Kate, I just want to follow up very briefly on that. So thank you, and I'll figure out how to lower my hand later. But I do just want to say, I do realize that I'm an elected official. And Kate, we've had this conversation, I think, really since day one, that I never wanted this to become a political thing. So you heard, I think Kate alluded to it. I believe that this is really our first public presentation about it, period. Because I did not want it ever to be perceived as political. And with that, I actually wanted it to be gone from my control, my influence, if you will, so that it does become kind of a living, breathing, community-based movement, initiative, idea, whatever. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. Thanks. And I'll figure out how to lower my hand in a minute.
You already did, or Amy did it for you.
I gotcha. Don't you worry. All right, Kate, are you ready to hop into questions?
Sure am.
Okay, so first of all, we've got a couple already in the chat, which as I shared before, I'll take them in the order that they were typed, but please, if you have questions, type them into the chat and we will make sure that we ask them. So we are going to start with a question from Vivian. Is Project Resolve, as stated on the PowerPoint, going to be a community-wide assessment, surveying the community and then sharing the findings with the city and county leaders, building a dialogue with other leaders? And then she says, for some reason, I was thinking that Project Resolve was similar to Modesto's chat, providing an alternate to sending law enforcement for mental health crisis situations. So glad I'm attending the Zoom. But are you able to speak, Kate, to her question about how is this data, how is the assessment getting shared back to cities, back to county leaders? How is that loop being closed even further?
Yeah, so I'm super glad, Vivian, for the question, because I think that because we haven't talked about Project Resolve a lot, we've left a lot of room for people to just make up their own stuff about what we've been doing. So yeah, this is a network of people that are talking about trust and strong relationships between community and law enforcement. So it's not a service provider. It's not an alternative, to anything. It's not a citizen oversight. It's not any of that. This is the interest is that we'll do a ton of learning, either through our activities, our conversations, community-wide assessments like the one that I shared with you, and that we'll get it to the people who need it, that it'll influence our decision making. So we have a lot of elected officials who join us for these meetings, and then the intention as we grow is that we would be sharing more information out with the community and other jurisdictions and whatnot. But we have every law enforcement agency, every city, everyone's in the room for these large group conversations.
Awesome. All right, our next question is from Julie. She asks, has this group discussed the state law about use of force, and how well do you feel we are doing in our agencies on implementing good policies and procedures on use of force? And certainly I would say Kate, but please, Sheriff Dirkse, Chief Ramar, Dr. Trumpetter, Marion, by all means, folks, jump in to answer questions as well.
That's Amy's way of saying, Kate, stop doing all the time.
That is not my way of saying that, but you invited them for their expertise, and we want to hear from them.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, we certainly have talked a lot about use of force. I know that it's a topic of conversation in lots of different places. So I can say that Project Resolve has talked about use of force. But I would invite, yes, as Amy said, our guests, I know Dr. Trompetter, you may have something to say. Yep.
Yeah, so the answer to your question, Julie, is yes. And the change in the state law, I assume that you're referencing, is the change that essentially said that use of deadly force should only occur when it's necessary, not just when it's reasonable. There's an emphasis in the use of certainly deadly force in the new law to have law enforcement agencies place a lot more emphasis on avoiding confrontations to whatever degree they can. And to the credit of the Sheriff's Department, and this pre-existed Project Resolve, we have what's called the CIT Academy, the Crisis Intervention Team Training, which is a 40-hour academy that deputies and officers go through to teach de-escalation techniques. And the Sheriff's Department started that in 2005. We've just completed, I think, our 28th or 29th. And I think there's more and more energy around making sure, certainly in the Sheriff's Department, and the sheriff can speak to this, he established an entirely new classification in his department, and CIT Academy is a prerequisite to get to that level in his department. So that's certainly one piece of trying to do a better job in reducing unnecessary or avoidable uses of force.
Yep, sure.
All right. Yeah. So Dr. Trumpeter's right. I'll try to make this as brief as possible. We created a new classification called Deputy Sheriff 2. Provides 10% more pay for those who qualify. There's a service commitment of 2 years. Once you have that plus 4 courses, you automatically qualify to be a Deputy Sheriff 2. But when we selected the 4 courses, one is very routine, basic traffic collision investigation, just kind of a very practical course. But the other 3 all center around alcohol or addiction type of issues and CIT, mental health issues. It's DUI. I realize this sounds like enforcement, but it's DUI, which is recognizing who's driving under the influence. 11.550, which is those who are under the influence of alcohol or drugs, not necessarily driving. And then CIT, which focuses on those with mental health issues and how to respond appropriately to them. But those 3 are very intentional. They are also, because there's always a legal side to all of this, they're post recognized, right? So they come with defined criteria, et cetera. But we did that so that we can incentivize our staff to get the training, which we do pay for. So it's not like they have to go pay for it. We provide it to them, but specifically to deal with those. The other thing that we when it comes to the use of force, we provided a ton of data in the original Project Resolve 1.0 on use of force. And I do believe, and I won't get into it too much because there's a whole separate hour-long presentation we could have on it. But a lot of people think, oh, cops are out there using force all the time. And the truth is that we use force 1 out of about every 400 contacts that we have with the public. That's not lethal force. That's any kind of force, which is anything from me, grabbing somebody's arm, a control hold, to deadly force, which is like 1 out of every 30,000 or 40,000 incidents. I don't recall the stat off the top of my head, but we are very, very aware of that and the perception that it has with the public. So we also do a lot of other things that are kind of outside of basic officer training, but that really focus on our processes for responding to critical incidents and trying to slow them down, deploy resources, drones, negotiators, whatever the case may be, to resolve them in a different manner.
All right. I'm going to ask Sylvia's question. Sylvia, I might need you to explain your question a little bit better. She says, what is the Sierra? Yeah. Okay. The Sierra Vista and TPD division program.
So it's actually the Sierra Vista, and TPD is Turlock Police Department, and
Thank
it's
you.
diversion program. So yeah, it was on the slide, our solutions portfolio. So thank you for asking, because I'm very excited about it. We actually just learned about this in our last meeting a couple of weeks ago. Sierra Vista, a local nonprofit that does a lot of work with young people, is working with the Turlock Police Department and is coming to, and the sheriff may be able to confirm or deny this, but I believe, well, I'm gonna tell this in a different order. Sorry. It's okay, Sheriff. I'm not gonna put you on the spot, I promise. Sierra Vista is working with a program. It's a diversion program that's an app on the phone that law enforcement officials can have access to. And what happens is that when, like, Turlock Police Department, for instance, comes into contact with a young person, and they have choices about what to do when they come into contact with that young person who may or may not be breaking the law. And so this app allows them to make a direct referral to the diversion program that's being run by Sierra Vista as an alternative to actually sending this young person to, like, through the criminal justice system. So it's a diversion program that they're piloting, and we're tracking, whether or not this is having an impact on, you could imagine being a young person who gets stopped by a police officer who then says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this app to connect you to some services, instead of actually citing you and starting a whole sort of proceeding, right? As a result of Karina Franco, who's the representative for Sierra Vista, coming to Project Resolve, and it was actually her first meeting, and speaking very briefly about this new project, I believe the sheriff is having her and the other law enforcement executives come to their law enforcement executive meeting so she can present to all the law enforcement agencies in Stanislaus County about this diversion program. So there's another example of how these spaces are creating those cascading effects.
Awesome. Thank you. Denise says, not a question, but a comment. Kudos to Project Resolve for holding up and making visible the collaboration across our county. There have always been deep commitments to working together in Stanislaus, and it's just thrilling to see the work being done now in an open and intentional way. I particularly liked the slide about the initiatives underway or ahead. Great presentation, and thank you. Thanks, Denise. So we've got a couple more minutes, so definitely time for some additional questions. Please, if you have them, throw them into the chat. Oh, we got a bit of, there we go. Okay, James. Project Resolve has done important work. Thank you to Sheriff Dirkse and the committee for their work. The solutions presented that are being instituted are impressive and much needed. Trust is important. Transparency between all parties is important as well. As we've seen, Modesto's Forward Together has done substantial research on the IPA and civilian model of oversight, which has shown that this model works well where it has been adopted. What policies has Project Resolve investigated or planned to in regard to community oversight?
I am going to invite the sheriff to respond.
Gee, thanks, Kate.
You're welcome.
No, it's the idea of oversight auditors it is, and Dr. Trumpetter alluded to it earlier, it is a very complex discussion. Because for every person who says they work, I can show you a study that says they don't work, which doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It just means that there is a tremendous consternation around it, if you will. There's a couple folks on here know that we have at the sheriff's office internally explored some ideas on this. And then you have these people called lawyers who like to weigh in and really push back on things, because if it's not broke, they don't want it fixed, which doesn't mean it can't be made better. So there's a lot of things that go into that. So I'm a member of a variety of various sheriffs organizations, Cal State Sheriffs, Western State Sheriffs, whatever. I won't bore you with all of them. But I have yet to hear of any of them that have some form of this that come back and say that is really value added to my community or my organization. And again, which, like I said, doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. It's going to be, if we want to do something that really is meaningful, we have to think it through very, very well, as opposed to have any kind of just a response to, oh, we should do this. And then it creates other unintended second or third order effects down the road that are not beneficial to either the community, the department, the staff, or citizenry, whatever the case may be. And so that is a very long way of saying we haven't done anything with it yet. Definitive. We've had a lot of conversations. I know Marion and I have had a very short one. Dr. Trumpetter and I have had a couple of them about it, as well as others in the group. We've had some group conversation about it, but it is going nowhere fast because it is a very complex issue, and there are so many different angles to it that have to be evaluated, is the simplest way to put it. And I am someone who is genetically impatient. You can ask any member of my staff about it. I actually have a little speech that, like, if I tell them, like, hey, do it whenever you can get to it, that means right away. Right away means now, and now means you should have foreseen that I was going to have this request and already had it done. So I absolutely get that there are things that don't move as fast as we might like them to. But I think if we want to try to do something reasonably well, you also have to put some thought into it.
Yeah, I'd like to just add a quick thing. Thanks, Sheriff. I appreciate you stepping in on that. So everything that the Sheriff said is true. And one thing I'd like to say about Forward Together, which we'll talk about next month too, but what people could see as a part of that process was that we had some presentations, and then the group made a recommendation that we should have civilian oversight and independent auditor. What I think is important to also point out is that sort of behind the scenes, there were dozens of conversations. There was, inquiry with officers about what it would feel like if this happened. We did work with the union. We did, so when the sheriff talks about these sort of secondary or, other effects or unintended effects that we have, we are wanting to be investigative without delaying important progress, but making decisions and saying yes to things in a way that is responsive to this community and its needs, in the context of where we live. The other thing I would just say is that I don't know if we're going nowhere fast. We are going somewhere at some pace. But the presentation that the folks in the Forward Together work group, and Marion Martino was a member also of the Forward Together work group, the presentation that they had from the 3 different jurisdictions on the use of civilian oversight and independent auditors. Some it was working very well for, others it was very much not. Lex, the countywide law enforcement executive team, had the same presentation. So we're collecting data, we're exploring things, and it looks different for everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. And Marion, you're right. If showing up is your superpower, patience is absolutely your kryptonite. I think you and the Sheriff are in complete harmony on that one.
Yep.
All right.
Amy, can I add something to that?
Absolutely.
The other thing that I do think is just germane to this discussion is that when we talk about Lex, Chief Ramar in Oakdale Police Department does not work for the sheriff's office. And Sirius PD is not part of the sheriff's office. Modesto is not, etc. That is all important, because whatever Jerry might want to do out in Oakdale, his city wants to do, that's one thing. They may do nothing. They may do something very different. Modesto may do one thing. They may do nothing, right? The sheriff's office. The point is simply the presentation of the information and the direction is up to every independent agency and their city, their board of supervisors, whatever the case, whatever their governing body is. It's not Lex has no authority over all of the various agencies. So I just want to, that's just kind of a point of order, if you will.
But I had one more comment about it, just to talk about the importance, I think, of Project Resolve. I think that the whole effort, investigation into civilian oversight is going much slower than I would like. But what I do like is that the sheriff is still open to the idea. He's still listening to people who talk on both sides of it. I think he's skeptical, and I think many of the other law enforcement executives are skeptical about it. They've heard all kinds of horror stories, of which there are many, about what the unintended consequences of civilian oversight. But the value of this is to have the people like Marian Martino and Wendy Bird and the mayor of Ceres all talking about the same issues. And we still have the ear of the people who are in power. And there's not that many communities that can brag about that.
That feels like a fabulous note to end it on. Pat, do you want to wrap us up?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank all of the panel so much. I think that we are definitely, as for the League of Women Voters, we set out to learn more, and you have been so informative. And because it was kind of a question, what is Project Resolve? I do believe people understand a lot more tonight. So we are here to help build those relationships and to pass on, quote, information, and to continue to support you in your search to improve our area. I look forward to, as I heard the chief say, Jerry, you said you would like to see, you're looking forward to the next set of statistics and that survey, going from 77, and let's see what the solutions, how they've been working, and let's see if we have improved on that. I bet you have. I think that this is all excellent things for our community. So thank you to Kate for being so willing to present and gather up you folks. And mostly, Sheriff, I want to say to you, thank you for your time, because time is precious, and, but this is very important, and you have made us very informed set of citizens. So we really, really appreciate tonight. And Marian, thank you. And our chief from Oakdale, we really do appreciate. So on that note, we will be having our next meeting, as Kate alluded to, is October 20th. And that is to follow up on one we had last year, which is to learn more about the recommendations on the Forward Together in Modesto. And I also want to encourage some of you who are attending tonight, you may not be members of the League of Women Voters. This is your opportunity. You just go to our website and we would welcome your membership. Our Zooms are all about learning and getting information out to our citizens so that we're more informed and can be the best community that we can be. So we thank you very much. And that's it. Thank you, Miss Amy, too, and Colleen, for gathering up all our Zoom stuff.
Absolutely, Pat. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.